Cheers. Okay, like my blue lights. Blue Ruin. This is one of my favorite movies in general, not just one of my favorite low-budget movies or anything. I think it does such an amazing job of crossing that boundary from. I think there's a brain space when you watch movies like this that go, oh, this is low budget, so I'm going to qualify it as low budget. Therefore, it doesn't have to meet the same standards as like a big budget movie. But the thing that I think this movie does really well is it really crosses beyond that metric of being a low budget movie. From the first moment, really sells itself as something that had a whole lot of money and probably a studio behind it. And that is all hats off to Jeremy Saulnier, who wrote and directed this movie. So a little bit of background on him before we get into the actual movie itself. Jeremy was not really well known, but he was a working cinematographer. So he was the guy behind the camera and the guy with the eye, and knew that he wanted to be a director, but his lead up to Blue Ruin was not a big, long one. He did a short film starring Macon Blair, the guy in Blue Ruin, and that got into Slamdance and won some awards at festivals. And then they went on to do Murder Party, which is a horror comedy, which Jeremy would then later come to find out that while that movie was fun and got sold and won some awards at festivals and got him a little bit of name, the name that he ended up receiving from that movie was not what he was looking for, because that's just not really what he wanted to do as a director. He wanted to be taken a little bit more seriously, and anybody that would look at him doing a more serious movie was just like, we have no proof that you can do that. So in making Blue Ruin, it was kind of his Hail Mary, his swan song, as he calls it, his last-ditch attempt to make something that would sort of legitimize him in the eyes of the film industry so he could have a real career at directing. So once they found out that nobody was going to fund Blue Ruin because he was an unknown director in that space and Macon Blair is an unknown actor, or was at the time, they couldn't get any big legitimate studios to come on and fund this, despite having done pretty well with their earlier movies. So they went on to raise the money themselves, at least the first big chunk of it, to be able to shoot the movie, which was $160,000. That was not the overall cost of the movie. That was just to get the movie greenlit. And they did so by maxing out credit cards and remortgaging their houses and going broke. But that just shows you the seriousness that this was not something that he was willing to just play with. Like, this was a real thing that he wanted to do, and he knew that he could do it. And so they raised $160,000. They ended up raising another $37,000 on Kickstarter. That Kickstarter page is actually still up, and it's really fascinating to go look at it, because, you know, there's it sort of varies between the director kind of sitting there going like, I wrote this movie and I thought it'd be fun. So if you donate $10,000, I'll give you a producer credit. And people just sort of not knowing what they're doing. And then there's Jeremy's video, and not just his video, but the whole campaign. I highly recommend, if you're going to run any sort of crowdfund, go check out the crowdfund campaign on Kickstarter for Blue Ruin, because it really just shows you how to do it in a nice, classy way that you're taken seriously. Anybody that, you know, comes across that page that looks at it would go, oh, like, that's a filmmaker that knows what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They're really staking everything they've got on this movie. And because they're taking it so seriously, maybe I should too. I really wish I would have been in Jeremy's circle at that time. I definitely would have donated to something like this, because the understanding of what type of film they were making was there from the get-go. I mean, they really knew from the storyboards, and then they shoot a bunch of camera tests with the C300 Canon to get some of the tone and the feel of what this movie would eventually come to feel like if, you know, they got the money, which they did. The total budget for the movie ended up being $420,000. The article that I was reading doesn't go into a whole lot of depth into where They got the 160. That was all on them and their hard work. And then I don't know where this other, bad at math, 280,000, whatever it was, that got them to 420. They don't really say where that money came from. I have a feeling they shot the movie, they got the assembly edit done, and then were able to then go out and find some more serious investors based on this really great movie that they obviously had, but just needed some more money to complete. All that to say, they missed their Sundance deadline, so they were racing and racing and racing. He had started writing the movie in January of that year, and they were finishing editing in October, and October is the submission deadline for Sundance and South by Southwest and a bunch of other really big ones. So he and most filmmakers try and get their movies done. I've got a friend making movies right now, and he's trying to get them done before the end of October because that's when all the big submission deadlines were. He was late getting the movie to Sundance. They had already programmed everything they were going to program, and he did not get in. And sort of as a lark, he submitted the movie to Cannes as well. And he got into Cannes. They ended up getting the final cut of the sound and the VFX and everything to Cannes 4 days before the movie premiered. So he got to see the movie in its final form for the first time with 800 audience members at Cannes Film Festival, which is just gotta be the coolest feeling in the world. And he actually does say that that's pretty much the coolest thing ever. It got purchased immediately, and because it got bought so quickly that day for North American rights, there was sort of a frenzy for other distributors to get their hands on it for foreign distribution. Jeremy, you know, he got swept up. Like, he got taken seriously, and he was able to put all of his eggs in one basket. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of Love Island. I didn't admit that just now. And it worked. I mean, the goal of setting out to kind of stake everything he had in one movie that would solidify his place in the film industry, it worked. So I love this movie because it's so much more than just a good movie. Understanding the story behind it, the artist that made it, what they went through to do it, and then the success that they found. Like, you could make a movie about making the movie, not even a documentary, but just a really inspiring story about a director going to make this incredible piece of art. Since then, Jeremy has gone to do a really brutal movie called Green Room, starring Anton Yelchin and Patrick Stewart and Imogen Poots and Eric Edelstein. That movie's rough. It's good. I mean, it's good. It's so well done. It's so well done that it's hard to watch. And then he did one called Hold the Dark, which was a Netflix movie that came out last year or the year before. You just kind of see his trajectory going like this. He ended up doing a couple episodes of the latest season of True Detective, season 3. He's really just gone from, being that artisan filmmaker who was betting on himself to, really climbing the ladder into the studio system. And that's personally what I'm kind of trying to embark on as well. It's just a really inspirational story. Let's get to Blue Ruin. Let's get to the movie itself. I got my blue lights up. They did such an amazing job at really the production design, taking the name of the movie, taking the color in the title of the movie, and really putting it everywhere. It's not subtle, and that's okay. I think it does a very good job of staying grounded in reality, but also existing in this sort of weird headspace that is Macon Blair, the main guy in the films. In his head, this movie's very quiet. It is not supercharged, adrenaline-filled action with thumping soundtrack and, blood and gore galore and crazy, shiny, backlit edge lights and that kind of thing. He really went for more of a grounded feel. The colors in the film are earth tones, which I love. I love the color palette in the movie. And it all just goes to show you where our main character's head is. He's sitting at lunch with his sister at one point to tell her that he's murdered the guy that killed their family. There comes a point in the conversation where he apologizes because he doesn't talk much. They really did such an amazing job at creating a character that you sort of live in the head of as the audience. Even if it's unfamiliar to you, you have no choice but to see through his eyes. The sound is quiet. You know, people fall down and they hit the ground, and it's not these loud, crazy crash thumps. It's everything is very understated, and I really appreciate this about this movie. Going back and watching it again, I hadn't watched it in a few years. It really feels more along the vein of like a quiet place, where the quietness actually plays such a big part in the movie, because he's this homeless guy, he's this recluse who, you know, lives under bridges and forages out of the trash can, but at night he'll go into his car and read a book. You know, he's not out trying to get his fix or any of these other things that you associate with homelessness. And so you see that he's a really thoughtful guy, and all of these, it's a really brilliant character study. And then it's got some really hilarious comedic moments in there too. It's almost like if you threw Charlie Chaplin into a hardcore thriller, because he obviously wants to rise to the occasion of exacting revenge on this guy who's killed his parents, but he's also just kind of a doof, for lack of a better word. He's very clumsy. He hurts himself just as much as he hurts other people. You know, he goes to stab a knife into a tire and slices his hand open. And so you get all these ideas of who this guy is based on his behavior. And it's not so much about him telling somebody how he is. You just get to learn that. Another thing that I really love that they did was the dialogue is all really understated. The dialogue almost isn't important. It's not very crystal clear dialogue where they went through and did all these passes to really take out any of the noise floor and clean up the dialogue to make it sound really articulate and nice and clean. You know, you hear the echo of the room. A lot of times the dialogue is quieter than the background noise, but it's done on purpose and it's designed that way. So you're not as much focused on what they're saying as the moment that they're living in. And that all goes back to that main character and how he lives and how he sees the world. So you get to see through his eyes, and he's not this, you know, coordinated hitman with these attacks. He's not going to go Denzel Washington or Liam Neeson his way into this family. He's going to stumble and, you know, cry and spit on himself, and and it just brings everything of that raw kind of realness of what any normal person would probably be like trying to go into a situation like this. They didn't have a big budget to go into production design, but the thing that they did really well was, again, finding those blues, really highlighting them, and taking out other colors, removing other colors from the scenes to make sure that those blues were really standing out and that they didn't have some contrasting color that draws your eye somewhere else that it's not supposed to. I would say there's a few handheld shots. Most of them are well constructed. Dolly shots, perhaps Steadicam. There's camera moves, there's tripod, but everything for the most part is very still. I love that style. I don't personally see myself shooting a lot like that. At least early in my career, I absolutely love stories like this that are told through shoulder rig, where you really feel like you're in there with the characters, you're part of the action. That doesn't ruin this movie for me at all. In fact, I love it, and I want to be able to implement stuff like that in my own filmmaking. But it's always just interesting to look at it. You know, Swallow, that we watched last review, they did a good job of balancing, you know, handheld shots with moments where she was in control, and tripod or dolly shots or pans and tilts with when she's not in control. This movie sort of stays the same style the whole time. You're not going one place or the other, and that's totally okay. Don't think that just because one director or one movie or one cinematographer did one thing one way, that's the only way to do it. As long as it's rooted in some sort of reasoning, you're safe to do whatever you need to do. With N-Trip, I went pretty much handheld all the time. There are 4 shots in the whole movie that were on either a dolly or a tripod. And those were all very specific moments where you were in Judd's head, kind of seeing the world as Judd and the beauty and the carnage. That's what I was going for. Whether that even came through, Probably not. You know, I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and I'm beholding my movie at this point. I would love to read the script of Blue Ruin. Blue Ruin is 90 minutes, and usually scripts read at about a page a minute. This movie is a little bit different because it's kind of like Drive in that so much of it is happening in action and not in dialogue. You know, you've got these really prolific writers that are writing pages and pages and pages of dialogue, really well constructed, really well thought out. You know, you've got Aaron Sorkin, you've got Quentin Tarantino, and Kevin Smith. We'll use three stylistically very different writer-directors. Don't feel like you have to write a bunch of really crazy, witty dialogue. This movie is a great example of the story being told in the silences and told in the visuals. It's also not reliant on its soundtrack at all. It more focuses on tones to make you feel a certain way than it does something that's going to make you bob your head to a beat. The script, I would imagine, is either 40 pages long as opposed to its 90-minute runtime, or it's all very slowly paced action blocks with a lot of spacing between them. I don't assume this would have worked nearly as well if Jeremy didn't write his own script, because he was able to conceptualize the timing and the pacing of how everything would come out, and then really in his mind's eye get to watch the movie at normal speed and have that confidence that even though the script was short or there wasn't a lot of dialogue, that there would be enough time in the movie. You tend to see a lot of low budget thrillers and horrors coming in at like an hour and 15 minutes, which is really just scraping the acceptable side of feature film length. It's not like Sorkin where, you know, there's probably almost no action happening on the page. It's just dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. You know, that middle strip of the page is just filled out with dialogue. And so you can do it either way, but definitely make that choice before you go into writing, especially a feature film, because I wouldn't do it one way and then, you know, halfway through the movie, flip to the opposite of whatever you started. So if you've got not a lot of dialogue in the beginning and then you go into like heavy dialogue blocks in the end, your movie's going to feel weighted weirdly. This movie was weighted perfectly for me because it starts out quiet. I don't think you hear somebody speak until 5 minutes into the movie. And then the key character conversations are very vague. They're very short. They're very cryptic. It's all inside baseball. They're not hitting you with really on-the-nose exposition. You're hearing exactly how much you need to know to be able to move to the next bit of the story. So basically the story is a guy who is homeless, living in his car on a beach, living a very solitary lifestyle, who gets a knock on his window from a police officer that the guy that murdered his family is getting out of jail. He basically makes the decision in that moment to go kill him. Easy enough plot. You know, it makes sense. It's grounded in real stuff, loss of family members and that kind of thing. And then it's a character study, but it's also a really effective thriller horror action. You know, the action scenes do exactly what they need to do when they do it. They're sparsely populated throughout the movie, but they're so effective. And that's one other thing that I think was done really well in this movie. I think when you're making a low budget film, you have these grandiose ideas of production value and like how you're gonna make your film feel bigger and more robust. And that's not really necessary provided you're telling a good story, you've got good actors, and you know what your themes are, your tones are, that kind of thing. You can really take these few moments, like in this movie when the guy kills this guy that got out of jail. You know, it's a very quick stab to the head, but you feel it. It's very close. I would be lying if I didn't say that the scene in that one, End Trip with the head stab, was not inspired by the head stab in this movie. Who did it better? Blue Ruin did. Blue Ruin did it better. I'm not afraid to say that at all. Um, but that moment, I remember reading in the Kickstarter them talking about how, you know, if they raise enough money, they'll be able to drive a stretch limo into a ditch. Like, these things, this is where you should spend your money. You know, spend it on a few key moments in the movie that people are going to go, oh shit, I'm going to remember that when I go to bed tonight. When the guy gets shot in the face and his jaw explodes off of his face, there's really brilliant YouTube videos. You can go actually watch the VFX breakdowns of how they did these things. And it wasn't a movie that was just chock full of gore and violence. When you really break it down on screen, there's probably 5 minutes out of 90 that actually have, you know, truly gory, bloody moments going on. But when they happen, they're so effective and they stick with you. That's what we need to be aiming for as low budget filmmakers. Anybody can, you know, buy gallons and gallons of fake blood and throw it everywhere, but really using it smartly, really using it intelligently in key moments, I think is so much more effective. Again, this movie it's not fast-paced like Good Time. If anybody here has seen Good Time, that movie is just like the moment you get on the ride, that roller coaster's going 80 miles an hour. Good Time is a great example of a low-budget film that just does not stop. Blue Ruin, again, they did such a good job of putting you in the head of Macon Blair's character. You're in his head, so you forgive the fact that, you know, it's not lightning paced, and you're there making decisions with him, like when he gets shot in the leg with a crossbow and he has to figure out how he's going to either pull it out or hacksaw it off and then eventually go to the hospital and get it taken out. And then you're with him when he walks away. So really staying with the character, and you don't need dialogue to sell those scenes. This movie is a brilliant case study in how to show and not tell. The moment where the guy's jaw is getting blown off, you know, they catch you off guard. You don't see it coming. And then that whole last sequence, the shootout in the house, they're key moments. They're short time-wise, they're heavy scheduling, they're heavy production value days, but there's very few of them. So it makes it a lot easier to digest writing the schedule. This was a 30-day shoot in 4 different states, and Jeremy employed a lot of things that he already had access to. So I would assume in the costs of the $420,000, or at least the $160,000 that they raised, they're probably adding the value of cars and the houses and the rental days and stuff like that. They had free access to a lot of those things, but the bigger, especially when you're selling your film, the bigger you can make your budget sound, the higher of a price point those distributors are going to come in and offer you. This is one of those seldom spoken about things when the budget talks come in. Offers from distributors are made to you on the assumption of what your movie cost. So don't run out there and tell everybody what your movie cost, because if it's a $10 million budget but the movie's bad, they're not going to give you anything, because they're going to be like, oh my God, you spent so much money and you didn't do anything good with it. You can really shoot yourself in the foot. And then on the flip side of that, you know, if you're really proud that you went out and shot a movie for $10,000 and you go tell the distributors that becomes the assumed value in the distributor's head. And that's all they need to help you make back. And then they can make the rest profit for them. I think if you went to just about anybody and asked what Blue Ruin would have cost, you'd probably come up with a price point of, you know, a couple of million. And so for them to go into Cannes Film Festival, and then the following year they actually did get invited to Sundance, those people that were coming and offering them, they had a much higher perceived value of what this was. But coming back around, yeah, Jeremy was very smart in baking in a lot of things he already had access to into the movie that he was going to shoot. He knew that it would make the process easier, but they still had 30 days to shoot this movie. For comparison's sake, for End Trip, we had 6. So it's all in the planning. It's all in the planning. And you can tell from the get-go with the camera tests and the Kickstarter, they did all the planning in the world before ever stepping on set to shoot a frame of this movie. The story is so simple in this one. It's a silent guy who lives by himself. He lives a very solitary life, but then, his journey is going to do something exactly the opposite of that. I mean, being a social person is one thing, but then trying to exact revenge on an entire family is something totally different. So a fish out of water story, a little bit. Definitely kind of a bumbling oaf. They sell a lot of the tension because you have no confidence that he's going to be able to pull it off. You see these big strapping kind of hillbilly looking guys carrying guns, and you look at Macon and you go, he doesn't stand a chance. And so much of the tension from the movie comes from this. Whereas, if he was a well-equipped, strong, athletic guy, that tension wouldn't have worked as well. When you watch Liam Neeson in Taken, it's family-oriented, so the stakes are there. I think the stuff with his sister is really nice and how she feels about the whole thing. And then there's this whole cryptic belief of the family that he's going after, the murderous family, which is really one guy, but then it's his entire family that, goes to pick him up from prison. And their beliefs and their belief that their brother was innocent, that he didn't kill those families. And so you take this main character who's already done the deed of killing the guy, and then you hear over and over again how he was innocent and he didn't do it. One of those hilarious moments in the movie when he crashes that stretch limo into the ditch, and there's the kid banging on the glass behind him, and he realizes there's somebody in the car that he stole. And that moment between them where they're just sort of standing there like, did you hurt Wade? Yeah. He hurt my family. No, he didn't. That's all. It's not a 20-minute fighting conversation where they're in each other's faces debating who's innocent and who's guilty. It's very, everything is very, very understated, and I just appreciate that so much, because anybody can talk too much about something, like this guy right here. Jeremy does such a great job of just striking this tone of less is more in the dialogue, in the music, in the sound design. I mean, everything is very understated, and it just works so well because, again, it all just works to put you back in the head of the main character. This movie is really told from his perspective. So I would challenge anybody that has just watched it once to go back and watch it again. Watch the shots, watch the framing, watch the mostly natural light, which is like my favorite thing in the world. And Jeremy he's a star when it comes to that. His films look so natural because all of the lighting looks practical. They might be using bigger lights, but everything looks practical, and he does utilize as much practical lighting as he can, whether it's out on the streets, with neon lights and traffic lights and that kind of thing, or in this movie, he uses a bug zapper to light the main character's face at one point in the movie. And he bathes him in blue, but he's got a reason for it. He found a way to do that in a way that wouldn't seem heavy-handed. Keep your eye out for Jeremy Saulnier. He just continues to be one of my favorite directors to watch. He does such a good, visceral job of creating tension. And he himself says creating tension is the hardest thing to do other than comedy. I'm going to leave you with that. If you get a chance, go watch Murder Party, his first movie. That had, I believe, a $150,000 budget. And when you hold them side by side, they're such different movies. And you see where Jeremy's passion lies and where he started. And it really just paints a picture of trajectory and really choosing the steps that you want to take intentionally in building the career that you want to build. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button down there if you're watching this on YouTube. Come and join us on the One Grand Film Open Filmmaker Group page. We're going to do this every month, and you guys will come in and join this conversation with me. Let me know in the comments what you liked or did not like about Blue Ruin. I'm super interested to hear everybody else's perspective. Keep in mind, all of this is just my own jargon that I keep swishing around in my own head as I move through my own filmmaking, writing, directing career. But Jeremy's one of those guys that I want to be like him, you know? He's a talented dude. And Macon Blair, Macon writes a lot with Jeremy, and they've got a match made in heaven. So watch everything they do. Go tell them you love their movies. Go tell them, you know, One Grand Film sent you. Thank you guys for being here. Help me decide what movie to watch next month. Vote! I think the vote opens in a few days for the next movie. Anyway, happy holidays, everybody.